Hi, everybody. I'm Stuart Reed, and I'm a executive director of Community Foundation Grey Bruce, which is one of the community foundation partners on Lake Huron Forever. And it's my pleasure to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional keepers of the territory in our region of Ontario, where my community foundation works. And just before I read the land acknowledgement, it's a very powerful moment that we take at the beginning of gatherings, more and more in Canada, when we come together, is to pay respect and gratitude for Indigenous peoples who have been the traditional stewards and keepers of the land and waters where we now live, work, and play. And we try and our community foundation has a one that we've researched, and the charge when you're doing a land acknowledgement is to really dig into the treaty history and the history of where you live and understand the territory that you're acknowledging and some of the circumstances that have precipitated us being here now as settlers. So I urge you, I haven't done that work for our friends in Michigan today. So the land acknowledgement I'm going to read today is for Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which is the place where our community foundation works. And we acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Anishinaabeg, the peoples of the Three Fires, known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. We also recognize the Chippewas of Nawash and the Chippewas of Saugeen, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as well as the Six Nations of the Grand River, the Haudenosaunee, Wendat, Wyandot peoples, on whose traditional territories we may gather. We also recognize the Métis and Inuit whose ancestors shared this land and these waters where we live and work. And we also are always mindful of broken covenants and the need to strive for justice in all our relations. And our closing wish is that we, as all as treaty people, live with respect on these lands and live in peace and friendship with all of the peoples. Thanks,
Thank you,
Maddie.
Stuart. All right. Next thing that I want to touch on really quick, before we get into Lake Huron network updates, is the Lake Huron Forever net or directory. So I'm going to share in the chat a link. So I will turn it over to Samantha now to give some updates.
We're kind of curious today on who is brand new to the initiative or Lake Huron Forever. I feel like most of you are not, because I know most of you. But Mandy, did you have a poll ready for that?
Yep, okay. I will launch that.
He's going to launch a poll. Oh, so we do have a few people. This is their first time in one of our Lake Huron Forever programs. And then some folks that are a little bit more familiar with Lake Huron Forever. Well, thank you for everyone on both ends of the spectrum for joining us today. I am going to do a really brief, really brief intro to Lake Huron Forever for some of the new folks. A few years ago, basin-wide effort was initiated by Council of Michigan Foundations and the Great Lakes Protection Fund to build network and groups for each Great Lake for sustained protection, with a focus on sustaining our livelihoods and vibrant communities surrounding these water bodies. And so you can see on the Lake Huron side, our founding members were these three community foundations: Bay Area Community Foundation, Community Foundation Grey Bruce, and the Community Foundation for Northeast Michigan. So still active partners in the initiative years later, and have been building this partnership and programming. And while we've built from this point of this basin-wide initiative, we've leveraged millions of dollars in funding, and we've grown the network and continued to build momentum. This, focus on community at the core of our initiative remains. So I think that's a really important aspect to acknowledge, and kind of sets us apart from, other environmental or conservation initiatives. So here's our founding group. I like to pull this up, and they built out this initial framework for us as well. So today, we work to advance water quality protection and healthy, sustainable communities on both sides of Lake Huron. So have active projects and programming going on both sides of the lake. And we've really been working hard to identify and implement nature-based solutions, and making sure that these are community-driven decisions and planning to protect our one water that we share. So at the core of this is our engage, activate, sustain model. So engaging communities and conservation groups and other active groups in our region to activate solutions and sustain a healthy lake. So quickly, because this isn't, just a quick overview, some of our engagement opportunities are getting some of that technical support, data collection, and building out assessments and tools, visioning and planning opportunities throughout our communities, and then doing some of that project scoping, prioritization, and helping each other leverage funding. We've had a lot of great projects this year. You'll get to hear about a couple today under this Lake Huron Forever umbrella on both sides of the lake, ranging from, green stormwater infrastructure for stormwater capture to coastal resilience planning and, educational and outreach initiatives as well. To sustain, which is obviously very important to us, we do this by, continuing to strengthen our partnership through learning circles like these, our annual One Water gathering, and then I wanted to highlight our Lake Huron Forever pledge. So Lake Huron Forever pledge is a commitment to publicly, solidify commitment to Lake Huron on part of municipalities across the basin. And with that comes an actionable roadmap that's tailored to each community. So that can include stormwater solutions, zoning and ordinance review, or invasive species management. It's a variable and tailored to each place. So we're pretty excited that this year we had a joint pledge taken by our partners in Alpena. So the city of Alpena, Alpena County, and the Charter Township of Alpena all came together to make that pledge and solidify that commitment. And then we are now working on implementing those roadmaps in these communities. So pretty excited. Also just want to give a shout out because Dale's on the call that Dale's the city manager, not Gray, and they were our first Lake Huron Forever community. And they have done so much on that roadmap that we are, Abby and I were just talking this morning, how we need to scope out the next phase of that roadmap. So I think it's a great tool. And it helps us to build out those steps and actions and figure out who in our partner network we need to, lean on to get this stuff done. So the other piece of this is, we've been from the beginning built out an action agenda to guide our efforts. And this year we finalized the next 5 years. And I'm not going to go into detail on that because we have a packed agenda, but I definitely would recommend checking out our executive summary on our website, lakehuronforever.org. And I just wanted to highlight one change, new thing in this 5-year action agenda, and that's the development of these working groups. So we're, it's similar, to a committee, but we really like to call them, working groups to lay out that, these are action-oriented groups and, with specific task laid out that we'll be working on over the next few years. So these groups are, building out Lake Huron Forever's governance model, sustainable funding approach, how we can address and build in additional climate action into our programs. And then finally, storytelling and data. So how can we communicate this? How can we broaden our reach and so people know about Lake Huron Forever? And that could be, from developing our website to communication tools. The final piece of that is, what data do we want to focus on for showing our impact? What are our metrics of success? So I highlight these because we would really like to grow the membership in these groups and to continue to strengthen relationships throughout our network and tap into those individual strengths. So if you're interested in learning any more about these, please contact us. So as of right now, Abby or myself would be the right folks to contact, and we will make sure to give you more info.
Thank you, Samantha. I'll pass it over to Lee.
Right on. I was looking forward to introducing Nick Schwass today. Nick has had a family illness, so I don't get to introduce him, and I just get to grab his notes and tell you a bit about the project. So I'm disappointed to miss out on his experience as well, from a teacher's perspective for this the project that went down in Wyerton. But if you'll bear with me with a primitive and short and sweet presentation, I'll give you the gist of the project, and I'll be back for the panel to talk more about Nick's notes, because Nick threw me some notes a couple hours ago about the teacher's perspective of how this funding was used in Wyerton on a Miyawaki forest and a bioswale. So if you don't know me, most of you know me. I see lots of familiar faces, but if you don't know me, I'm Lee Gregg, and I'm a volunteer with the Sustainability Project and Regenerate Grey Bruce. The reason I'm intertwined with the project is that Lake Huron Forever was one of several funders that funded the bioswale in Wyerton and Miyawaki Forest. Another one of the funders was Regenerate Grey Bruce, and I live close to the site. I helped out a lot to get plants in the ground, and I took a bunch of photos, and that's what you'll be seeing. Although my kids go to school down the road, the arch rival Nemesis soccer team in Hepworth, so my kids don't go to the school itself. Nice. So that's the backyard of PSDS in Wyerton High School and Elementary School. It's pretty unique. There's a imaginary line for recess at the back where the K to 8s don't get to cross, and this imaginary line runs right around halfway. You can see just the edge of the playground there. So we didn't have a lot of little kids trampling on the freshly planted trees. It was the design came from Thorsten Arnold, who's on the call. So I'll try to do it justice, but in essence, you see a parking lot to the right, and that parking lot collects a lot of storm water, and you'll see that it's on a slope. There's a slope here that has the opportunity to catch that storm water, move it towards a tiny Miyawaki forest. As a funny little side note, and you can keep your eye on this in the photos, right below the word tiny is a little patch of ice. That's actually, in rainy days, that's actually quite a swampy little bit of sod. And that was just maybe not so much a clever, but a very unexpected benefit of moving water around here. We were able to interrupt and keep the turf nice and dry for the kids. One last thing before is Regenerate Grey Bruce is that is a different project that Sustainability Project helps out and hosts. Their goal is to change the narrative of what's a desirable landscape. So we clicked a lot of boxes with our several wonderful generous partners. we were able to rip up some of this sod and create biodiversity here as well. So this is what Nick Schwass and a bunch of others was looking at before we started, and this is my little doodle of what we could have put here. You'll see again, I think this is the same photo, but you'll see the slope here. This is where the runoff was taking place, and that's facing north. This is facing south, and this is where you'll see in the following slide, you'll see a cross section of this slope in this from this perspective. So you'll see this, the lot is on the left, the logs are coming in the middle, and you'll see the slope is on the right. So here's the cross section of exactly that. The parking lot to the left, the water runoff, creating a bit of a nature-based silt filtration with the shrubs, trees and shrubs, piling up the log, which is the big orange circle on the right, to shape the land from being a slope into a bit of a bowl, and the bottom of the bowl being the little blue dot in the center of your screen, which is a pipe, a big O covered in gravel that moves the storm water towards the tiny forest to keep it hydrated. So yeah, here we are with the logs and the mulch, and we couldn't have done this without the great help of McCartney Property Maintenance. That's a little great little positive of being in a small town. We got 3 quotes, but we were able to give the excavation work for this, as you can see, the bioswale in the middle of the screen, to the same contractor that does all the snow plow and the maintenance already. So that was great because we were able to lean on them for advice as an external group from the school. And this is the tiny forest to the right. So I'll go back and forth just a bit between the last 2 slides. The tiny forest here is in the shape of a bit of a triangle. And as you'll see, the bioswale is a big straight line catching the runoff. And as you can see, it's also an opportunity to do a little bit of beautification, a little landscaping, nothing like a good co-benefit to make the project go down. So we were able to create like a spectator area as well for the track and field events that happen and the football events that happen, soccer events, to see those Hepworth Hawks. Right, enough of that. So we had wonderful volunteers like Beth Ann. We got the construction crew in. It wasn't very invasive, but we did have them in for a day to create this trench. One of the major parts of the recipe with a Miyawaki forest is that it's all native species. So let me rephrase that. A tiny forest is a trademarked recipe that is native species with a recipe of very close planting. A couple of people on the call be able to describe it better than I would, but what we did and why we're calling it a Miyawaki forest is a nod to our Mr. Miyawaki from a Japanese botanist instead of a tiny forest, is because we took this opportunity to do a bit of science on the back schoolyard and put in a Carolinian species section to explore and learn about assisted migration of some Carolinian species. So what you see in front of you is 9-bark, and about 90% of what we planted, maybe 95% of what we planted, was native species to the area. And that's really what helps the soil become really robust and create a mature, healthy forest right away. And it's what sets apart a tiny forest from a regular tree plantation. But in a small section, and that's the 5%, we added some Carolinian species like pin oak and Kentucky coffee trees, just with an eye of, because it's a small town again, a lot of us are connected to the community. You can see a lot of volunteers in some of these pictures. We knew we were going to be able to use this as to run a bit of science on the trees that, with climate change, may be migrating north and doing better. So with all these eyes on the tiny forest, we were creating a venue for the community to come out and to assist. And that was my wonderful job, was to help create the work bees and to get the volunteers to come in, because there were over, I think we ended up planting somewhere close to 800 trees in this small section of the schoolyard. And you can see a lot of these photos will, you'll see a bunch of the kids that were here as well. And so that was a major, and that I'll go into that more in the panel with Nick's notes, is that was a major upside, is we were able to get the children get their hands dirty. You know, research, I'll skip through the rest of these photos, but you'll see one thing in particular is there's lots of volunteers, lots of kids, and lots of watering because there's but yeah, I mean, research, I wanted to say research like consistently indicates that people will be more likely to help protect or advocate for places and things that they have that they've experienced firsthand. So the kids being out here planting trees with their hands, if you help plant a tree, you're far more likely to be considering its needs and into the future, now and into the future. And it's the same with like a place, like the examples like a provincial park. If a person were to visit a provincial park, they'd be more likely to protect that provincial park over the provincial park they've never visited. So by involving students here, like they're not simply learning about the biodiversity and the stewardship and all the co-benefits, they're also feeling a sense of stewardship and attachment to the place. So I'm gonna keep it short. I've got a ton of photos that I'd love to share, but I think you get the idea. Maybe I'll share one last one. I do want to mention that we had a lot of partners, and and as you'll see, we see small things of biodiversity on what was formerly finely manicured lawn here. Baby steps. So yeah, I'm sure you'd all love a little time lapse. This is probably the best one. And if you'll bear with our internet speed here. So the fence here in the middle is just a stopgap measure to protect the little seedlings. But as you see along, we took the fence out. I'll go into that later. And we've got a lot of growth just in the first summer. The bioswales in the background, moving the water. The tiny forest is a benefactor of that landscaping and that nature-based solution. And I lied. I do want to show one more that is going to help you. Yep. So part of the part of having such a wonderful array of partners like Huron Forever, we were able to make 3 big signs and thank our partners at the bottom. This is one here we produced that explains, on the top right, explains our own bioswale, the cross section that I showed earlier. And then on the left, it shows what a healthy watershed would look like in general. And on the bottom right, what an unhealthy watershed can look like. So some interpretive signage here we felt was really important to create. It goes a long way to making it a venue, first of all, because people will congregate and you can have host a couple of events. And we put down some log stools to create a community venue. And having multiple funders was integral here to have flex funding and to have secured funding. Lake Huron Forever was funding this project via Stewardship Grey Bruce. So we have to thank Stewardship Grey Bruce. And it was all coordinated by Thorsten Arnold. And we'd really like to thank Thorsten Arnold, who's also on the call. That's it for me. And I lied again. I wanted to show you the water in a rain event. So here's our rain coming in and flowing into the mulch on the left, which moves the water.
Great. Thank you, Lee. That was great for jumping in last minute. Really appreciate the pictures too. It tells a lot and shows a lot. So, so appreciate you doing that and look forward to hearing more from you when we get to the panel. I am going to introduce our next speaker, Catherine Luce, and I just want to make sure that Catherine, you can hear me and we can hear you. I know you're having a little bit of trouble connecting here.
Yes, hi, I'm here. I can hear you. I hope you can hear me just fine too.
Yeah, we can. You're coming through really well. And Meg is going to show your slides. So
Yes.
if you can help her kind of navigate through them, that would be great.
Yes.
So while she's getting those up, I'll just give folks a little bit of an introduction to who you are. I'm pleased to introduce Catherine Luce, who teaches high school science at Alcona High School, which is part of Alcona Community Schools. Not only has Catherine engaged with Lake Huron Forever through a lot of different opportunities, like the One Water Gathering that we held here in 2022, and by reaching out for technical assistance across our network in order to understand her projects and implement them. She did receive some funding through the Lake Huron Forever Partners program to implement the project that she's going to talk about today. A rain garden at a local harbor in Harrisville, Michigan. So Catherine's a great ambassador of place-based, nature-based education at Alcona Community Schools. They have a really long history of making that a priority from administration down to the classroom level. And so Catherine is one of the lead teachers, which they have won through all schools there, is a perfect ambassador and champion for this kind of work. So Catherine, if you don't mind, I'd love to hear more about your project.
Yes, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for having me and letting me introduce my students' project. So the project we named lovingly Project RAW, standing for Restoring Alcona's Watersheds. And my students have been adopted by the local harbor in which they identified pollution issues, trying to mitigate those going into Lake Huron. So Meg, if you could go down a couple slides. Yep, thank you. So here's a quote that I like a lot, that I've shared with my students and like to present. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. From Margaret Mead. I love that quote, and it is so true. Our young adults can make a big impact on our local communities, and my students are the perfect example for that. They have started the project from planning it out to financing to implementing it, and now this year's crew has taken over trying to re-engineer it. So I have to say that this quote packs a punch and really captures how I feel about my students. So in the next slide. Thank you, Meg. Why place-based education? So I think there's three basic components of place-based education that are important to mention. One is that it allows our students, our young adults, to take ownership of their own learning. And I have seen over and over again that if they're implementing something hands-on, they're much more likely to retain the information than when they're sitting in the classroom and learning it via looking at their book or online articles or whatever the means may be. They take ownership and pride in it. Two, the students connect to their community and their local environments. As I said, they have started their project RAW at the local harbor, trying to mitigate those pollution issues. And then three, of course, we all as teachers have to fulfill certain standards. So for us in science, we have to employ STEM strategies, trying to figure out how to implement science and technology and engineering and math, and wrap those all in a beautiful package, teaching those to our classes. And it works so great when you're employing place-based education. So next, this picture right here has one of my students leading a group of elementary kids. So after the implementation of the garden, they got to teach the elementary students about pollinators. So that was something that we got to do this year and they're very proud of. But it links good to this slide because I asked them in the beginning of the year, what is it that you will do to make a difference in school this year? And a lot of my students don't really have an answer to that question coming into the classroom. And as the time goes on, they develop a pretty good and strong answer to that question. So I tell them in the beginning of the school year in my environmental science class, that they're allowed to find their voice and that they have a reason for being in that class, and they all find their little niche within becoming environmental stewards. Okay, so when they were choosing their project, there were 3 steps. One being, what are the issues on hand and why they're important to be addressed? 2, how could we eliminate the issue and cause a positive change in our environment? And 3, of course, we have to implement that change. It's great to see what is going on in the environment around us and what might not work, but that all doesn't do us any good if we don't cause a positive change by the end of it, which is what we've been addressing all year. So in the next slide, Mick, there's a couple pictures of the harbor. So in the first picture up on the top right-hand side, there is the harbor as it used to be on the right-hand. So you can envision that there's 2 parking spots, the 2 little, the 2 areas. So there's a top parking spot up off to the left. And then closer to the lake, we have the bottom parking spot, and there's quite a slope that goes down. So a lot of the stormwater issues that are coming from the road and from the top parking lot are going straight down the hill and into Lake Huron. And that is where my students identified the problem, that there's something that had to be done right there in this area. Also, they extended the parking lot to the right. So in the bottom picture, you can see that the parking lot has gotten extended to where there used to be a volleyball court. So there's more blacktop actually since that has been put down, creating an even bigger issue in regards to chemical pollutants that might come from the road. Okay, community partners. So we had a lot of community partners, and fostering a positive community relationship is key when working with kids in the community, and Huron Pines has been a big part of that. We have a lot of different partners that I am so lucky to all have and take part in what Project Raw has become, and thank you all for your help in making this happen. I really appreciate it. Financial support, Meg, that would be on the next slide. Yeah. So Lake Huron Forever grant. So we got some supplies, and we are planning on getting some signs out. So those would be upcoming. Right now, the sign that is on the right-hand side is one of our temporary ones, just showcasing that we have received funding, and there will be a more permanent solution that we'll hopefully be able to implement in the spring. Let me see. Okay, so then 2022, 2023. So if I can walk you really quickly through how this project has gotten implemented. So we had different stations. They had a flow of water stormwater station, a stream exploration audit, a trash audit, and a harbor park tour, which was the first step in trying to identify the problem, and they have successfully done so. Meg, on the next slide, it will show, I'm sorry, I know we're kind of going quickly through this, but there's a lot that I would like to show because my students have really done a lot of work with this project. So they have identified pollutant issues, which is why they decided on a rain garden. So after the trash audit and calculating the slope of the parking lot from one parking lot to the other, we have come up with a rain garden idea. And also on the next slide, Meg, non-native species. So we had an issue with non-native species being in the area, and we wanted to make sure that we showcase only native species in our gardens. So what has happened is they have taken out some invasive species. Unfortunately, after implementation of the garden, some of the non-natives have taken over once again, and we are trying to find a more permanent solution, but I am still learning, and so are my students. So we are still, we're still going at it strong, and I think we have a better idea of it now. So then we have identified the problem. The next question then was, what do we do next? So it's great that we said that there, or maybe not so great that we have said that there is a lot of pollutants in the area that needed to be stopped, but what do we do about them? So then we made a feasibility plan. So my question to them then was, what does the environmental change look like? What will this change require? What rules need to be changed? What potential barriers to the project do you see? And so on and so on. So they did some further research. They went on a couple more field trips. They took a little bit more data. And then the last visit at the harbor before the implementation, they did a percolation test. They took some soil samples to the classroom. They did a slope analysis and rain garden mapping. So their decision to put the plans in place that are in place was very calculated and very scientific. So they did a lot of work trying to figure out how big the garden needed to be, what plants to implement that require sun and the soil that is there. And then they implemented the garden in the spring of 2023. And Meg, there's a picture or a few pictures with the blue. One more. Yes, there's one right there. So then they implemented the garden, and that was the class in spring of 2023. So that was the class prior to the current one. So then what had happened was, and I don't think we need to go to any further slides, but what had happened was that we saw that there was still problems with stormwater runoff. So this year's class implemented a burn in the back of the area. They also took out some non-native species. They kind of relocated some of the irrigation system that was in place, and we just tried to re-engineer and make it function a bit better. In the spring, we're going to have to put some new plants in it, as some of the plants that were in there got crushed by the non-natives that took over. So only the more resistant ones made it, which is fine. There was 450 plants there, and I would say the majority of those plants are still in the garden. But there's just a lot of work still yet to be done, and a lot of learning on my side and on my student side. And I am so lucky to have all the community partners on the side that I do. And yeah, so we're still in the process of making the garden function as intended, which is where we're headed with this year's crew. And I think that is all I have to introduce.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate you walking through that project and the rain garden design and implementation that your students have gone through. I also appreciate you sharing some of those things that maybe didn't work out the way that they were anticipated, and that you're continuing to learn yourself, and students are coming in and thinking about what, that ongoing sort of maintenance and problem solving might look like around some of these place-based, nature-based solutions.
Yes, and it's all part of the ride. So thank you so much.
So now that we've had a couple of deeper introductions into what these place-based stewardship initiatives can look like at local schools and how they're connecting to Lake Huron forever through water quality and nature-based native plants types of connections in terms of how we protect our watershed and bring youth into that sphere, we'd like to have a panel with Lee and with Catherine and with a partner we have from Lake Huron Coastal Center. And Maddie is going to introduce our panel moderator and set that up for folks.
Thanks, Abby, and thank you, Catherine. I'd like to introduce Meg Schwartz, Network Coordinator for the Northeast Michigan Great Lakes Stewardship Initiative. Meg, through her role with Nemi-Glissi, is a champion for place-based stewardship education and plugs into Lake Huron forever in many ways. I'll now turn it over to you, Meg, to facilitate our panel discussion.
Thanks, Maddie. Yeah, so I have worked directly with Catherine. I was excited to hear about Lee's project, and I'm excited to hear more about Carrie and the work that she does with youth through her Youth Corps initiative. So I will be moderating today's panel. Feel free to drop questions as they come to mind into the chat. We've got some questions prefabricated, but we can also take your questions, and would love to hear what things came to mind for you as you were listening to Lee, Catherine, and you're going to hear a little bit from Carrie as well. I will say I'm coming to this from a very place-based education mindset and flavor, so that's where my questions are coming from. So would love to hear a diversity of questions from partners and other educators that are in the room today. With that, Carrie, if you would like to introduce yourself and share a bit about the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. So Carrie Kennedy, I'm with the Lake Huron Coastal Center, which is working on the Canadian side of the Lake Huron shoreline on community engagement, stewardship, monitoring, research. So the concept of a Coastal Conservation Youth Corps really hit and fit all of the goals of the Lake Huron Coastal Center. So we are going into our 5th season, which is very exciting. A little bit different than our other presenters, that the Youth Corps, I guess, it's a summer program or in the fall outside of the school system. So complementing what kids are learning in school, but it provides that hands-on, place-based experience of their own choosing. They're volunteering to come spend their time, and they do get volunteer hours to credit for their final high school transcript, which is a great plus, a great motivator to having them come. So they, as I said, come for a week or over a pair of weekends in the fall. And 5 days, we have different topics that we cover, from restoration to wetlands to shoreline litter and microplastics. So we try to hit a range of topics in that time, getting them out. So usually the participants I guess initially they just came once, and now more recently we've had some participants return for a second year. So there's that real opportunity to build on their experiences from the first year. So that's us in a nutshell.
Awesome. That's great to learn more about what you're doing, and love that you've had repeat youth corps folks. That shows that the programming is good and they want to come back. Awesome. So I think how we'll run the panel is perhaps the first question will go in order by presenters. So Lee would go first, and then Catherine and Carrie. And we might skip around a little bit and maybe reverse the order a bit. But for now, we'll probably just stick with the order that the panelists went in and presented in. But my first question for you is, we are all collectively gathered here today because we care about the health and well-being of Lake Huron. So I'm wondering how you see the role of schools, school districts, youth corps groups that you're involved in advancing Lake Huron Forever's mission of protecting water quality and ensuring healthy, sustainable communities on both sides of the lake. So Lee, if you want to go first and take a stab at that, that'd be awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, you might, I would want to, I saw that question. I just, I would be tempted to add outdoor schools. Nature schools are also such an obvious candidate for future advocacy for Lake Huron. But my answer is just like the connections between what they're doing, how they're treating their waste, what's downstream, right to the shorelines. And there's connections of where stuff goes, where your food comes from, those connections to where you live and what you see around you create, in my experience, creates advocacy and creates agency. Like you can act on these issues if you make those connections. I'm feeling humbled by the people in the room with Watersheds Canada and everybody here, Lake Huron. With everyone here seems to be dealing with shorelines, community foundations. I mean, everything is connected. So pointing out connections.
Yeah, I love that. And not only thinking outside the school, but like in the school itself, and what are the systems there, and analyzing them. So yeah, great insights. Catherine, if you want to take it next. And I can repeat the question too, if you want.
I have the question right here. I'm just reviewing it really quick again. So I think that my students, with what they're doing with their Project Raw, are directly impacting the water quality of Lake Huron. At least that is the goal in the end. We are currently working on the, restoring Alcona's watersheds. How are we actually trying, or how do we actually know that we have successfully restored or a watershed, at least in that local area that we're trying to do so? So I think the next piece of the puzzle for us is water quality monitoring and how we want to go about that. So that would be the next one for us. But everything that they do in regards to the garden always has a beneficial impact on Lake Huron directly. And I think that is something that they take a lot of pride in. I certainly take a lot of pride in their work.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, there's definitely a direct impact in the work that you're doing. Carrie, if you want to go next, that'd be awesome.
I certainly will. So in my work with the kids in the summer, you can see the threads of their school experience, whatever that might be, a traditional school setting, a homeschooling setting, or a forest nature school. they bring that knowledge, they bring those skills with them to the summer program. And it's been very interesting to see that that's evolving over the years of the program. I can see that new topics are being threaded into the curriculum, things we really needed to talk about and kids had no idea about before, like say microplastic. Now they're coming with this knowledge. So I think that threading of emerging issues, keeping things current in the school system and in our education is very important. And having that regularity of discussion, keeping conservation and water land protection issues in the forefront of our conversations in education, in a regular basis is very important. And, again, in addition to that knowledge curriculum, of course, as Lee mentioned, that connection and the skills gained in confidence, in that inquiry approach, in not being afraid or intimidated to ask questions about what they observe and what they see. The hope is to empower them to ask the questions, to follow through, get information, and feel empowered to be able to engage and take action in the future. So yeah, their observations are super powerful. And yeah, youth, adolescents in particular, it's just a mind-blowing time of development. So they are incredibly open, incredibly innovative. So yeah, capturing this innovation potential is great.
Yeah, that's a great segue into my next question that involves student voice and agency. And Carrie, I might just have you continue on, and then maybe we can reverse the order, having Catherine and Ali go. But my question's about student voice and agency, knowing that that's super important for buy-in on projects like Catherine was alluding to and you were alluding to. I'm wondering how you involve students in the planning and execution of the projects that you do or the work that you do with the Youth Corps.
So in our situation where each new season, new youth are coming, sometimes I don't know until Monday, who's coming in. So we could have a really broad range of ages, experience, even engagement levels. So this year we did have quite a few returning participants. So it was really nice, several months ahead, invited those returning participants to join in a Zoom meeting so we could hear what really resonated with them, segments that they might be interested in taking a leadership role on, and that just helped the engagement. In terms of those land-based projects, of course, there's huge coordination in communication with the landowners, things that need to be set up before an experience like the Youth Corps occurs. So those things have traditionally been myself, but a great story from our years, a participant that participated was hired as a stewardship assistant for the last 2 years. So to see an actual participant now, take that leadership role as a staff person and help with that engagement is a really, yes, great outcome of the project. I guess on a smaller scale, sometimes restoration doesn't need to be perfect. It's not like a landscaping plan where there's an exactly right way. So where possible, being able to take a step back and to give that agency to the kids to make a plan is really great. In our first years, we had a big wide open area we could return to in Goderich, and the youth broke into groups, made a restoration plan, or each group made their idea of a plan. Then we came together to discuss the pros and cons and picked one to implement right there and then. So there's some flexibility with the messy nature of restoration.
Yeah, I love when there's the ability to vote on something and then it's like, all right, this is what the majority says, we're gonna go with this. Catherine, I was hoping that you could expand. You talked about student voice throughout your project in your feasibility study, but I was hoping you could call out a couple of examples of where students really got to make a choice with the Rain Garden project.
Yes, of course. So for instance, when we first started the project, they were asked to do a couple different things. They did the, well, for one, they did the trash analysis with you where they picked up the litter. We took that back to the classroom and they identified where the biggest problems were laying. We also did in that first go around have a stream exploration audit. So for those of you who do not know, our local little harbor here in Harrisville, there's a stream that runs into Lake Huron that has some problems in and off itself as the retaining wall that is holding it up is crumbling away. So there's another area of potential issue that might have to be addressed in the future. So that was something that was introduced to the students. So they had the choice between, you know, do we want to stop the pollutant issues that we're seeing in regards to chemical pollutants and litter? Do we want to tackle the stream? Or what is it that we can see that is a problem to the environment in our local community that we want to tackle? So they made that choice and they decided on the garden. That was not something that was initiated by me. So I think the whole birth of the project was probably the biggest choice that was given to them. And I still have students from that first year's class. I had one, in fact, this morning that came back in, and he'll come in periodically and just check in. And he's always hopeful to come on field trips with us again because he wants to see how it develops. So it's just nice to see that it really, truly does make an impact on them as well as the environment.
Love that student interest, even after they're done with the class. Very good. Lee, I was hoping you could share of any student choice points, student voice, and agency that you're aware of with the bioswale project and tiny forest too, which is not such a tiny forest with 800 trees. I caught that in that first beginning part. That's a lot of trees.
It's meant to be about the size of a tennis court, so it is a lot of trees in a small amount. But because we had the bioswale, yeah, we doubled that, doubled our impact. No, I would have a completely different answer than someone in the education system. I'm not an educator or teacher. I'm an advocate for environmental climate solutions and etc. But yeah, as an outsider, I mean, if you want youth to be heard and youth to be held up and given a voice, you need to exploit like every single opportunity that you see that that you can make a connection to their existing institutions. So they're like, if you see, we found in a bioswale project, we found a lovely teacher in Nick, and we found an amazing vice principal. I mean, the principal was great too, but our vice principal gave us the opening that we needed to meet and sit down, and she was absolutely interested in the project. And once we knew, it wasn't so much about working through the details with her as much about just finding out how much time she had and what we could make out of the molehill that we had with her, making a mountain out of a molehill in a good cases. Thorsten, yeah, man, you feel this.
I just want to comment. One citation was, she said, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. And it allowed us to do things and then correct it if particular things didn't work. The regular process of going through the board and asking for permission would have been incoherent with the time requirements, both of this, of any funding, and also the life cycle of native plants. Yeah. Like, plants need to go into the ground at a certain time. Institutions don't care about this timing. So matching timelines between funders, institutions, and plants, I think that was one of the biggest challenges in this entire project. So yes, if anybody is willing to give basically to trust us as a group and then give us permission to play around and try things, that was in my opinion the greatest enabler from the school. Anyway, thanks Lee for just wanted to comment that. Thank you everybody, and hi everybody.
That's great. Yeah, thanks Thorsten. I saw that beautiful interpretive signage too that was placed by the bioswale. Did the students have any role in creating that? There was some artwork that was part of that too, and partners called out. I didn't know if they had any role in that.
Like we have 3 signs. One is on biodiversity and the tiny forest, which is our simplest sign. Then we have the intermediate sign on the bioswale and healthy watersheds. And then we have one on living landscapes and the self-regulation of the climate by the biosphere, which is definitely high school level. And I could talk an hour about this sign. So we try to, from our side as educators, work with graphic designers who are experienced in communication, but we did not try to pry out this knowledge from students. I think it's a big balance to take, like how much time do you have and how deep can you go into it?
Certainly. Yep, certainly. My next question, and folks, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, like I said, or personal DM me too. You can just message them to me if you want to remain anonymous. But my next question is about expanding the project. So I was hoping to hear from Catherine first. She sounds like she might be doing some water quality monitoring or maybe looking back at that stream project. And then Carrie and then Lee for this next question. So what are your plans for expansion, duplication?
So we have been looking into purchasing some basic water monitoring, and over the long stretch, we have even considered something a bit more fancy to where we have some sort of system in the water that can retain there, and we'll get some information out as the years go on. But for now, we're just purchasing we have just ordered 6 kits for water monitoring, basic water monitoring, quality testing, as well as we want to start doing invertebrate sampling. I know that our middle school is doing a lot in regards to invertebrates, and they can tell us a lot about the quality of the water. So we want to take what they have learned in middle school just a step further and apply that to the harbor. They should have a pretty solid foundation of that already. And yeah, we're going to start there with some basic sampling, see how the water quality is and how it might change over the years, as well as seeing what we can find in terms to invertebrates, because some are pretty sensitive to changes in the water. So that might already tell us a lot about what's going on at our harbor.
Thanks, Catherine. That'll be great that students might have the potential to have a couple of touch points with invertebrates and continue to build their knowledge as they go through multiple grade levels. Carrie, hoping you can share about plans for expansion if there are any.
Absolutely. At this time, the program has run 2 communities along the shoreline. Goderich was the start. We added and rolled in Saugeen Shores. For next year, we've been in conversation with the town of Concordant. So that would be an expansion to incorporate a new community, because there's all this learning about the landscape, the relationship building to bring that new project on. So that would be, dreams, hopes for next year. Like big dream for me would be the idea of expanding the youth corps in a sense so that they could be doing projects through the year. Having those graduates keep mentoring and working as a group on small projects throughout the year. So that's just my private big dream.
Love that. Yeah, mentorship can be really powerful. Lee or Thorsten, are you aware of any expansion, duplication? Are we just going to turn the entire campus into a forest? Do you guys know what's in the works?
Yeah, I have to leave in a couple of seconds, so I'm just going to take this also to say goodbye.
Sure.
There have been a few interested people, including the municipality of Georgian Bluff, who want to put a tiny forest basically into their lawn. Other schools are interested. I think it's a pretty hot button topic. I have never heard about the combination of tiny forest and bioswale. It's normally people either do one or the other. So that's kind of cool. And I also hope to continue working about basically building a local native plant value chain collaboration of many partners. And it's really good to have public sector projects that are financed with grants. And if you know of it in advance, then this builds demand, local demand. And if you want to build producers who actually want to create supply, then you need to permanently balance demand and supply. So those projects can actually be utilized to trigger a native plant economy. And doing that strategically is something that I believe would be really useful to help local nurseries, but even educational nurseries, like schools, can grow those plants. So that's how to do that. That's the big question for me that I'm currently chewing about. Anyway, I got to go. Have a good one.
Yeah, thank you. Good luck with the butchering.
And I would just add that this is definitely there is an opportunity to have this as a venue, especially at this. That's why we have these little sitting areas, and that's why we're focusing on the signage. And these trickle down things that Thorsten mentions, like the native plant value chain, these are big solutions that have to involve and that create economies of their own. But expanding this work around the community, it has to start with an opening, with an intervention point in a system. So the intervention point in the system in our example is the school system. The intervention point is the tiny forest, because it's an introduction to a bigger story of what to do with your lawn, what people around the community, you can do with your civic spaces, and how it can be really rewarding.
Very good. Yeah, there's been, just in conversation with teachers that I work with, there's an interest in growing native plants. We haven't quite thought about creating the economy for it yet, but there's greenhouses here that are adjacent to schools, and why not use them to grow native plants and sell them to folks? But the demand has to be there, like Thorsten was saying. So that's great. Let's see here. Questions. I would love to hear, so we've been talking a lot about like really obvious benefits that come along with these projects and this type of stewardship work, but I'm wondering if anyone can go on this question, if there's a specific example of like a positive outcome that was an unexpected benefit that has since emerged. And feel free to unmute yourself if you got something to say.
I can start. There's a lot of co-benefits. If you just, like someone said to me, when you renovate your house, you should pause. You should do it over a longer period of time so you can stare at the rafters, and maybe you might change your mind and spend your money more wisely a couple of years later. So there's a lot of co-benefits when you have flexible funding, like we got with Lake Huron Forever. We got it from the Rotary Club, the service clubs give money that's not tied directly to outcomes. And a co-benefit of ours is like the soggy turf that I hinted at. So like it was something that annoyed everybody at the school, staff, students, janitors especially. The custodial staff especially. It was just the way they had soggy turf just for whatever reason, and just having that connection with the school allowed us to pick a spot that ticked a whole bunch of ticky boxes.
One of the benefits I hope, and I maybe don't necessarily see down the road, is I guess mutual benefit, both for the youth who participate and say the landowners who maybe have some restoration done on their properties. One of which is this intergenerational connection for the youth to generate, or to work with, to speak with, mature adults in a professional manner. For the landowners, I think this sense of community, it can be quite daunting as a landowner along a very precious shoreline to feel this responsibility for stewarding the land and to feel very much on your own. and having this, you know, community come and be able to say, we appreciate, we value this land as well. We're here to help. Give that sense of community. So one landowner in Southampton, we did a restoration and planting on her property. And then, you know, we've happened to come back in subsequent years. I've been able to show that, you know, to the next groups that walk by. The landowner has maybe been in the garden on the deck and has come down and talked to the next group. So there's this legacy that keeps going, and a true sense of community, and that we are in this together.
Lovely. Yeah, it's great when there can be generational bridges and learning and wisdom passed down for sure. Catherine, you had shared that you had a student that wants to still be part of field visits, even though they're beyond your class now. Are there any other anecdotes that you want to share about student impact or anything in that area? Other benefits?
Yes, if I could build on what was previously said. So I have students that come back, or in particular, the one student that will come back to the classroom, I think mostly in hope, trying to go to the harbor with us again to try to see some progress through, which is really sweet. That student has a dad in the Forest Service, and the dad had reached out to me offering his help, which is really nice. So I can see the same thing in my students, to where we are making connections across the community. Everybody, more so, the more attention the garden gets, the more attention my students get in regards to help of the project. So that is really nice to see. And the more they take pride in it, and the more they talk about it, the better we can help, you know, Lake Huron to stay healthier. So that is really a good spiral there that has started to develop, that I just couldn't have anticipated prior.
Those community connections are so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I did get a question from the audience that wanted to expand on hearing the process for engaging with community leadership and what the role students played in that, and maybe if there were any lessons learned along the way. So community partner connections and students coming together. Anybody can take this question, but Catherine, I don't want to pick on you, but I know that you've had lots of partners along the way. You know, you just talked about students connecting and having relationships with folks. Did they do any sort of like specific tasks to reach out to community members? And Lee and Carrie, feel free to jump into, were there any lessons learned along the way?
Yeah, we really did have we were very fortunate to have a lot of community members on the way. For one, you with Nimiglissi, and then of course Huron Pines. We had Friends of the Thunder Bay. We had, who else? We have MSU Extension. There were just a whole bunch of people that have helped us along the way with tips and tricks and some finances, and that was really good to have. Sorry, would you repeat the question now that I've turned myself around with all the...
Yeah, I'm just wondering how students were part of like making those connections, if there were any ways that they connected directly with community partners or community members too.
Mm-hmm.
And if there were any lessons learned with that, any communication bumps along the way, or things you might be.
I think to bring it back to Huron Pines, my students actually wrote the grant that they ended up receiving from Huron Pines. What I had done was that I reached out to Huron Pines. In regards to the grant, we got an opportunity to write a grant. I took the grant and sectioned it up. There were different segments that had to be filled out in regards to informations. The students actually each had a few questions which they answered. We put it all together in a document, and then they submitted it to Huron Pines. So the whole process of getting their funding was solemnly on them, and I feel like that was an important lesson for them to be learned, and an important connection for us to make. And there were all kinds of things like that along the way, where students are just empowered by getting to meet all these different people, you know, from U.S. Fish and Wildlife to MSU Extension to all these different community partners that have taken part of this. So yeah, it's a really powerful thing.
Awesome. Thank you. Lee or Carrie, did you want to jump in at all?
I think in our experience, I love that, Catherine. I'm thinking, okay, how can we do that? That engagement has happened with the staff at the center, but is really benefited from the relationship that Lake Huron Coastal Center has through their Green Ribbon Champion program with the landowners and municipalities. That's been really a critical benefit.
All right. Well, thank you all so much to keep us on time. I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you, Carrie, Lee, and Catherine, and Thorsten, who's not here anymore, for contributing responses and giving us a little more insight on the stewardship projects that you have going with students across the Lake Huron Basin. And I will pass it off to Maddie, I believe, to wrap it up for us.
Yep. Thank you, Meg. And thank you, Carrie, Lee, and Catherine. That was really great. I think it was really valuable to have such a variety of perspectives and experiences on that panel. So thank you all. Just a few updates before we wrap things up. I'll try to keep it quick because I see we only have a couple minutes left till 5:30. But just a few quick Lake Huron Forever updates. Our next learning circle will be on April 9th. And it will highlight Lake Huron's biosphere regions and how they utilize and leverage UNESCO global program. And before you all leave, I'm going to put a quick poll up for you guys to provide some input on future topics for learning circles. And if there aren't any topics on the poll that you're interested in, feel free to put those in the chat and I'll mark those down. Stuart, do you have a question?
I think he was clapping. Also,
Okay.
I'm cutting in here because I wasn't ignoring a couple of comments that came up in the chat about the tiny forests being a pilot project, and then some intergenerational learning comments there. So just wanted to let you know that I saw those, and everybody take a peek.
Thanks, Meg. One Water Gathering 2024, tentatively scheduled for mid-September in Saginaw Bay City area. So it's coming back to Michigan next year. We have a new button on our website for those of you who haven't noticed. We're hoping to launch newsletters for 2024, so keep an eye out for those. And then another quick reminder to update that directory so we can keep adding on to that. And I'll share links to that following this meeting.